Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. As we conclude our series on Pope Francis' Apostolic Exhortation, Rejoice and Be Glad, on the call to holiness in today's world, today's Do You Know question is, do you know why Pope Francis sees the call to holiness as essential to Christian living? Each baptized person is called to holiness. Vatican II, Lumen Gentium, the Constitution on the Church, Chapter 5, states very clearly that all Christians, all baptized Christians, have a universal call to holiness. That call to holiness is connected to our baptismal commitment. Every baptized Christian is called to holiness, and as articulated by taking on the mind and heart of Christ. Now, this association with holiness, for holiness and baptism, was not always an association that most Catholics made. Catholics, for the most part, associated holiness with bishops, clergy, the priests, religious, but rarely was it ever associated with married or single people. As a matter of fact, if you look at the list of the canonized saints, was and still is very heavily dominated by clergy and religious, and rarely is there a married person or a single that is canonized as a saint, a model for us to imitate. But since Vatican II, the emphasis has been the linking of the call to holiness to our baptismal call and commitment. So that with every Christian, every baptized Christian, the call to holiness is an essential aspect of their spiritual lives. They live out, it's very clear from the Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, that we all have this vocation. As a matter of fact, they state that there's only one vocation, and that vocation is the call to holiness. We live it in different lifestyles. Some are clergy, some are religious, some are married, some are single, but we all have the same vocation, that call to holiness. This Vatican II theology and the spiritual is the theological and spiritual backdrop to Pope Francis' Rejoice and Be Glad on the call to holiness in today's world. Pope Francis very clearly states that the heart of this call is the gospel values modeled by Jesus and articulated in the best by the 8 Beatitudes from Matthew's Gospel, and the call to holiness, and the great criterion established in and through Matthew chapter 25, which essentially states that concern for others, whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me. Along the way, Pope Francis points to dangers on this path to holiness. And the two dangers that he specifies are Gnosticism and Pelagianism. Now, both dangers are two sides of the same coin. For what they do is they create an image of God into our own image and likeness. We turn God into an image and likeness that we want. And as a result, what ends up happening is we domesticate God. We conform God to our way of thinking and our way of acting. These are great dangers that Pope Francis sees on our path to holiness. Along the way, Pope Francis also provides guideposts and markers on the path to holiness that keeps us straight on that straight path. He especially mentions 5 of those markers of holiness, and they are perseverance, patience, and meekness, the joy and a sense of humor with all of life. There's that passion and boldness when speaking about the values that are important to us, our living in community, and our living in constant prayer, tuned to the Lord, and so on. And so, guided by these signs, Pope Francis says very much that we will grow in holiness. Francis sums this all up by asking us to develop the gift and the grace of discernment, where we attune ourselves to the experience of the Spirit present and active in our life. With temptations, multiple voices pulling at us, distracting us, and much of the distractions of life, these can all be very challenging on our journey to holiness. But prayer, attention to and listening to the Spirit, love, concern for others, all these things truly help us in our struggle against the temptations that veer us off the path, and we can continue to grow in holiness. So I hope this has explained just a bit of why Pope Francis sees the call to holiness as essential to the spiritual life, and how it's really rooted and grounded in the theology and vision of the Second Vatican Council. This concludes our series on the Rejoice and Be Glad, the Pope Francis Apostolic Exhortation, and I hope you will return again to more Do You Know series questions as we continue to explore our faith and our religious traditions. Thank you very much.